We think differently.
It's my great pleasure to open today the third in the series, so-called Geneva lecture series, in which we are discussing geopolitical and geoeconomic affairs. We started with the former Secretary General of OECD, the former Canadian the Treasury and Finance Minister. Then we followed up with the rector of the UN University, and today we have a pleasure of hosting in a virtual way, but hopefully also in a real before too long. We are having an exceptional guest, Professor Ioannis Varoufakis, who is a really very paramount figure, in a way, a newcomer and a shaker of let's say the economic thought, not only of let's say political left, but also of the economic thought. What is very significant with the Professor Varoufakis is actually that he comes relatively from the periphery, because the main narrative is taken by especially the Anglo-American world or the bigger countries. And it is very exceptional that we have voices that are coming from, let's say, smaller countries. So I think it's very inspiring for all of our participants today that this is possible to come from the smaller country, from relatively, let's say, peripheral place, be it physical place or the place of the narrative, and make such a big, let's say, and considerable let's say, input and imprint on the politics. And it's not only that Professor Varoufakis inspires let's say, the political left, but is also helping the, let's say, the entire narrative, which for a long time needs the contra-narrative. So one of the problems of today's world, of course, is the lack of the contra-narrative, because we are lacking the contra-narrative. And just before we give floor to him, to announce that on the 10th of December, we have a former president of Austria as our guest, and it will be more or less closing to the let's say, to this period of the year, to Christmas. And one little, let's say, joke to share, when we try to compare, then they said that actually Noam Chomsky would be a Pavarotti of the left, and then Professor Piketty would be a Carreras, and then Zizek would be some sort of Lady Gaga, if you put this in terms of music, and then Professor Varoufakis would be a Mick Jagger of the scene, in a way. So this is just to open with the joke. So Professor, floor is yours, and we are very happy to have you today with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I particularly enjoyed the gag at the end. It's a great pleasure. And as you say, these are critical moments for humanity as a whole. And we need to manage to break out of echo chambers and bubbles and to communicate across the political spectrum, and especially between the metropolis and the periphery, as you put it so succinctly. Now, I'm supposed to be addressing you regarding the new international institutions that we need at this juncture of economic and social history. I take a slightly different view to many who claim that COVID-19 and the pandemic have caused a new crisis which should concentrate our minds. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I believe that 2020 does not constitute a turning point regarding a new crisis. What I think we have is an intensification through the pandemic of a crisis that began some time ago, 12 years ago, with the financial meltdown of 2008, a crisis that never went away, that has been metamorphosizing and morphing into different crises, but nevertheless maintaining a coherence, a period of perpetual stagnation and low investment relative to savings that has many if you think of them as byproducts, nasty byproducts like populism, like an intensification of racism, of xenophobia. Now, let's begin in 2008. Those old enough, and I can see some in our audience who are not old enough, but I'm sure you have heard of 2008 in the same way that our generation studied and understood 1929, because 1929 was the 2008 of the 20th century that changed the world. Nothing after 1929 made sense in terms of things that were supposed to be conventional wisdom before 1929. So I shall start at that pivotal year, 2008, and particularly because it was the year when commentators, politicians, central bankers from different countries and different parts of the political spectrum all agreed that it was time for a recalibration of global financial institutions and global institutions more generally. One issue that was revealed as very substantial and significant in 2008 was trade imbalances and imbalances in the flow of capital from one jurisdiction to another, from one country to another, from one continent to another. Those were seen in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008 as serious contributors to that collapse. Trade imbalances and imbalances in capital flows. And the idea was to recalibrate the institutions that came out of the Bretton Woods system, out of the Second World War in the 1940s, to recalibrate those institutions. You remember that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were two global institutions, crucial institutions to this day, that were part of this Bretton Woods system. And what was the purpose of the Bretton Woods system, and therefore of the International Monetary Fund and Bretton Woods? Well, it was to curtail trade imbalances and to prevent the trade imbalances from causing capital flow imbalances that then would beget instability and crisis. Now, if we go back to that conference in 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire in the United States, there were two monumental figures that clashed during that conference. One was an American, Harry Dexter White, representing the President of the United States, the great FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The second figure was John Maynard Keynes, representing a fading British Empire at the time. Unsurprisingly, it was White's scheme, White's proposal, White's blueprint, founded on the United States post-war trade surplus, a surplus that was used by the Americans. Can I ask you please to mute everybody else? Because I can hear voices. Can we mute those who are not supposed to be speaking? Because it's a bit distracting. Okay, thank you very much. So it was the American blueprint, not Keynes's blueprint, that in the end prevailed. And the idea of Bretton Woods was this: fixed exchange rates anchored on the United States dollar. All right. Now, can you hear me? I hope so.
We lost you. Okay. No, it's okay.
You muted me. You muted everybody, including me. But that's okay. I'll go back. The perils of teleconferencing at the time of the pandemic. Okay, so the Bretton Woods system was based on a common dollarized monetary system. When you fix the exchange rate of the British pound, the German Deutschmark, the French franc, the Japanese yen to the US dollar, effectively you're dollarizing the West. But as the protagonists of Bretton Woods understood, the fixed exchange rate regime could not survive unless there was a means by which the surpluses made in the surplus countries could be recycled into the deficit countries. But of course, after 1944, 1945, there was only one country that was in serious surplus, and that was the United States of America. So the whole Bretton Woods system was based on America being in a surplus position and recycling its surpluses to Europe. Remember the Marshall Aid Plan? This is a way of taking surpluses from the United States, transferring them to Europe, not out philanthropy, but so as to enable there was a and to assist the Japanese economy, even to the extent of imposing upon Detroit and American manufacturing free trade with the Japanese emerging industries in order to support Japan as part of this globally planned economy based on fixed exchange rates with dollar at the center. Now, this new post-war system provided the foundation for capitalism's finest hour, a period of 20 years more or less of steady growth, of shrinking inequality, of low inflation and low unemployment. That was the golden era of capitalism, the Bretton Woods system. But of course, it couldn't last. The Bretton Woods system had to be jettisoned the moment America lost its trade surplus. And that happened by the end of the 1960s. By the 15th of August, 1971, President Richard Nixon blew the whole thing up. The Americans are very good at destroying a system they created when they see that it is past its due date. And then after that, we had a remarkable second post-war phase. The second post-war phase begins in the 70s with the oil crisis, and particularly with the policies of the Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker in the late 1970s, early 1980s. The gist of it, if I may be allowed to just collapse a very long and complicated period into some essential aspects of it. The gist of it was that unlike the Bretton Woods era, where you had fixed exchange rates and the US surplus underpinning the system and stabilizing the system, you had the opposite. You had a US deficit, trade deficit, which was actually getting larger and larger and larger, and not by accident, and variable exchange rates. The American deficit was operating by the mid-1980s, because it was getting larger and larger and larger, as a gigantic vacuum cleaner, sucking into American territory the net exports of Germany, of Italy, of Holland, of the petro states, oil, as well as Japan. And later, after Deng Xiaoping's reforms, of China. In a sense, the American trade deficit was keeping factories in the rest of the world functioning at full blast, with investment high. Now, who was paying for this American deficit? The rest of the world was, because approximately 70% of the profits of the German, Italian, Saudi, Japanese, and Chinese capitalists were being recycled, those profits, through Wall Street. The money was sent to Wall Street to breed there, to be financialized, and that was closing the loop, an amazing recycling mechanism. Now, on the back of this tsunami of capital, which I estimate to have been in net terms around 5 billion every working day for, between the 1980s and 2008. On the back of this tsunami of capital, you had the bankers. What do they do when you give them billions every day to play with? They find ways of making multiply, breed. It's called financialization. Options, CTOs, CTO squares, CDSs, you know the story. These houses of cards, and that's where they were houses of cards, at some point collapsed under their own weight and under their own hubris. And this was 2008. At that moment, right, At that moment, you had a getting together of the G20 to allow central banks effectively to coalesce, to create a coalition in order to refloat the banking system and the financial markets, which they did very successfully. The problem was that austerity was also practiced, so aggregate demand fell everywhere. And you had this imbalance between global savings and global investment, which was very low because investment responds to low aggregate demand. If aggregate demand is low, investment is low. Central banks pumped a lot of liquidity into the financial sectors that created massive liquidity. Liquidity is a supply of money. Investment is a demand of money. When the two maintain a gap between them, the price of money comes down. That's the interest rate. That's why it fell below zero. That's why we had the stagnation of the last 12 years. So this is not something that was completely unforeseen. Let me give you an example. In early 2009, when the great and the good got together, the G20, in London, if I remember correctly, it was April 2009. I remember the governor of China's central bank in that meeting lamenting that Bretton Woods had not embraced one of the two proposals that was rejected. Remember what I was saying at the beginning? In Bretton Woods, you had two great figures, Harry Dexter White, whose proposal, because it was the American proposal, was adopted, and John Maynard Keynes. And it was Xu Zhaoxuan, the governor of China's central bank, who in April 2009 lamented that it was not Keynes's proposal that was adopted. But that was not just the Chinese perspective. In 2011, 2 years later, do you remember Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the then managing director of the International Monetary Fund? He was asked what he thought of the International Monetary Fund's role after the crash of 2008. And he replied, almost verbatim, that Keynes, 60 years before, already foresaw what was needed, but that it was too early. And Strauss-Kahn said, now is the time, 2011 was the time to do it. And he thought it could be done. Now, of course, within weeks, Strauss-Kahn fell from grace without ever explaining what he meant. But in the remainder of my talk today, I will try to fill in this gap by suggesting that which he might have meant. A new Bretton Woods. And this is the topic that I want to cover today, that I announced I will be covering, the new global international financial institutions that are necessary. A new system, a new Bretton Woods system that would reflect the original proposal by Keynes and the view underpinning it, that global stability is undermined by capitalism's innate tendency to drive a wedge between surplus and deficit economies. A surplus economy, for instance, is the German economy. Germany is always going to be in surplus vis-a-vis France, or vis-a-vis Greece, or vis-a-vis the United Kingdom. That's what a surplus economy. And a deficit economy, well, Greece is a good example, but also the United States. You can have a small deficit economy and a large deficit economy. So capitalism, according to Keynes, and I happen to agree with Keynes on that. I don't agree with everything that Keynes ever said, but on this I agree entirely, has a tendency to drive a wedge between surplus and deficit economies. The surpluses and deficits have a tendency to grow larger during the good times, during periods of growth. But then when bubbles burst and growth gives its place to recession, especially deep recession like we had in 2008 and like we're having today, the burden of adjustment, of austerity if you want, falls disproportionately on the debtors during the downturn. And that creates a debt deflationary process that takes root in the deficit regions before spreading to the surplus areas, dampening global demand everywhere. And this is my view of what happened after 2008. Now, what had Keynes suggested in order to counter this tendency? What kind of institutions can do two things at once? During the good times, lessen the buildup of surpluses and deficits. And then when there is an inevitable crisis, capitalism will always have crises, to prevent the debt deflationary process from damaging deficit economies in a way that in the end exports unemployment to the surplus economies and deflation, not just unemployment. Keynes' solution, the one he proposed at Bretton Woods in 1944, the solution that the Americans rejected. He referred to it as an international clearing union, an ICU, International Clearing Union. And the idea was that all major economies would subscribe to this union. Now, the idea is that every country would keep its own currency, or jurisdiction would keep its own currency, and its own central banks. But members of this ICU, the International Clearing Union, would agree to denominate all payments in a common accounting unit, which Keynes referred to as the banker. Today, the IMF has a relic of this idea. You may have heard of the special drawing rights, the SDRs of the IMF, which is something like a common accounting unit. So if you look at the accounts of and the research papers and the proposals coming out of Washington, D.C., out of the International Monetary Fund, you can see that they are not referring to sums in terms of dollars, in terms of yen, in terms of euros. They refer to it in terms of this common accounting unit, the SDR. But this common accounting unit does not affect the global economy. Why does it not affect the global economy? It doesn't because Keynes' idea was rejected. And the basic idea is not that you just create this common accounting unit, because it's irrelevant if you're not using it, except for accounting within the IMF. His idea was that all international payments should be settled in that common currency unit. So why would that be significant, and why would it help? His idea was that if you have a ledger at the IMF, and every time a German car is exported, let's say, to the United States, so a Mercedes-Benz goes to the United States, a sum of money goes from the United States to Germany to pay for this car. On the ledger of the IMF, there's a column there in which you register the sum of money that went from the United States to Germany, and the export that went from Germany to the United States. So you have the current account and you have the capital account. And let's say that at the end of the year, that was Keynes' suggestion, we add up all these numbers. And a country that is in a surplus, like Germany, pays a small percentage of that surplus to the IMF, to a special account of the IMF. But similarly, a country that is in a deficit to all other countries also has a small percentage of its international trade sums transferred to this collective account by the IMF. That way, effectively, you are introducing a levy to trade imbalances, and a symmetric one. You tax simultaneously, you levy simultaneously both deficits and surpluses. Now, why is this important? It's important because that would put a lid on the growth level, the growth rates of surpluses and deficits. Now, Keynes' proposal was not without problems because this was a period during which fixed exchange rates were supposed to be essential for stability. He was envisaging fixed exchange rates. My proposal now is for a new version of this international clearing union, a new Bretton Woods, which acknowledges the fact that we live in a world of variable exchange rates. So imagine that this common currency unit at the level of the IMF, let's say, or a successor institution to the International Monetary Fund, it's called, let's call it the cosmos, shall we? Units of cosmos. And suppose that we have this digital ledger with all trade flows denominated in cosmos units, and the cosmos unit, which is a weighted average, if you want, of the dollar, the yen, the Chinese renminbi, the euro, and so on. The cosmos unit has a free floating exchange rate with every currency, and every currency maintains a free floating exchange rate with every other currency, but all trade and capital flows are denominated in this cosmos unit. And you have these two levies that are an extension of Keynes's original idea. Which are the two levies? The first one I've already explained. You have an automated process by which we all agree, those countries and jurisdictions that are part of this new Bretton Woods system, we all agree that, let's say, percent of surpluses and deficits symmetrically are taxed automatically at source, and in a global equity wealth account, let's call it a global equity green account, green wealth account, is created, and the money is the cosmos units that are levied go in there. Similarly, in order to ameliorate for a second source of global instability due to capital surges, we introduce a second levy, which I call a capital surge levy, unsurprisingly. Now, what's the idea behind that? Those of you who have studied developing countries, you will have no doubt encountered a very ugly fact that there are times when there's some El Dorado-like moment when international finance thinks that, Ecuador or Venezuela or, for that matter, Kenya or Greece or India or Indonesia or Turkey are the place where they will make money, where the projected growth is high. So suddenly there is a surge of capital going to these countries. This is catastrophic, this surge of capital. Why? Because anytime there is a surge of capital, there is a gold rush of sorts, an El Dorado moment. The surge in capital lands in those countries, Indonesia, Turkey, wherever. By simply landing in those countries, it creates an asset price inflationary bout. So, real estate starts going up because people go in there and set up business and they, rent or buy apartments or build skyscrapers in the capital city. This surge of capital increases imports from abroad. Local importers suddenly feel much richer. This surge of capital also becomes local loans. People get more credit cards domestically. That creates a bubble. Once the surge in capital, the owners of that surge in capital realize that the returns they were hoping for are not as high as they thought they would be, and especially the moment that they start smelling in the air the possibility of a crisis in that country, the capital that surged in surges out. The moment it surges out, the bubble bursts domestically, and all that is left behind is broken dreams and crushed souls of the people in those developing countries. So why not charge a capital surge fee in the same way, Uber does it, I don't know how many of you have used Uber. I'm sure we all have, maybe slightly guiltily, but we have. When there is a lot of traffic, there is a lot of demand, and you try to use your Uber app in order to book a taxi, it comes up with a surge levy. It says, this is very busy times. You'll have to pay, £2 or euros or whatever, Swiss franc more. So similarly, why not have a situation where, since all international payments will be made via this ledger of the IMF, denominated in cosmos units, you can have a surge capital levy. If money is surging into a jurisdiction, all those who send money to that jurisdiction pay a small tax that goes directly into the same global equity green wealth fund. And what happens with the money in there? Very simple. It helps invest if you want, anything between 8 and 10 trillion US dollars every year in green transition. Where will the money come from? Well, this is one possible substantial source, the Green Equity Wealth Fund, which will be funded automatically by the trade imbalance levy and the capital surge levy. The beauty of this proposal, if I may say so myself, is that you are killing two nasty birds with one stone. The first nasty bird is the trade and capital imbalances, which are destabilizing the global economy, constantly generating crisis, and with every crisis, millions of people, billions of people are held or left behind. That's the first target of the one stone. The second target is climate change. By introducing these two levies through this new international institution of a new international clearing union, a new Bretton Woods system, financial system, you are taxing the imbalances that create crisis, and you use this money in order to fund investment in a Green New Deal, in a green transition that the planet needs. There are many aspects of this that we can discuss. How will foreign exchange markets work? What does this mean for local banking, for national banking? What does it mean regarding the necessity of creating also new states of equilibrium within our national economies, not just between our national economies? It's not a silver bullet for solving all the problems of humanity, but it is an essential new institution, at least in my understanding, towards rebalancing trade, rebalancing capital flows, and helping ameliorate for climate change. Now, there's no doubt that John Maynard Keynes was ahead of his time in Bretton Woods. That's why his proposal was rejected. It is also true that it was rejected because Bretton Woods was effectively convened and determined by the United States. The United States at the time was the only global power at the end of the Second World War. Without the United States and its hegemony, maybe Bretton Woods would not have taken place. If it wasn't for the fact that humanity was beginning to come out slowly and painful from major carnage, we would not have we need to have a hegemon, like I was hoping that the hegemon is going to be liberal and progressive and not an awful tyrant that will do enormous damage upon humanity. Where will the leadership come today for implementing an international Green New Deal and a new internationalist Bretton Woods? I have no answer to this. Wherever I look, I see a dearth of political leadership. What I do know is that if we are going to have new international institutions that make a difference to the world, for the good, not for ill, it will have to involve tight and close cooperation between three major powers: the United States, the European Union, and China. Unfortunately, the United States and the European Union, since 2008, which for me is the pivotal year of our generation, have shown a remarkable failure of leadership. China has its own problems: authoritarianism, violation of human rights, of minorities, and so on. But they have not had the problem of incoherence and paralysis when it comes to leadership. The European Union is a basket case. There's no such thing as a European Union. We have a European disunion. You put together the words European foreign and policy, and you end up with a joke. You see what is happening today in Libya. You have the president of France supporting a warlord and the European Union supporting the so-called UN-backed government. I despair. The world deserves a lot better from Europe. The European Union needs to have a united position on these matters and needs to play an active role in designing, not simply accepting, but designing global internationalist institutions. The United States, what can I say about the United States? It's a country whose constitution is written in order to create paralysis. It's not just President Trump. We had Obama before that. He didn't control the Senate. Paralysis is a designer feature of the United States. It's very rare that you have a government that controls both the White House and Congress, while at the same time not being misanthropic. So I think that the onus falls upon us in the West, in the European Union, in the United States, to impose upon our leaders the need for international institutions that can lessen the crisis and can dampen the capacity of capitalism constantly to throw up new crises that diminish the prospects of humanity, both as a species facing catastrophic climate change, but also as societies struggling to find some kind of social and economic balance. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. It was very, very inspiring, content-rich, although it's let's say rather compact of what you have said, but it was walking many, many miles. I'm sure that audience has questions. Let me monopolize now just to ask you to clarify, not really to put a question. So one of the problems, I mean, you just hinted at the very end, you know, so whatever reshape or Bretton Woods #2 or extension or refurbishing, however we call it, you know, and also putting some of the initiatives, I think you didn't mention Tobin Tax Initiative, but it implied also one of the let's say ideas that were circulating within the UN system earlier, but was not living. So practically, it looks like we are facing the let's say the strategic decoupling of the Sino-American world, which will polarize and which will come to binary categorization, either with us or against us. So it will, of course, hinder many things. And second, which is pretty much resting on my soul, what is your take on PPPs within the intergovernmental systems? Because shamefully enough, we got the silence all through this crisis, not to mention the crisis of 2008 or 2009, which was practically a Wall Street crisis or Wall Street induced crisis. But this crisis with the C-19 is a global crisis, and we really strikingly, the UN system is strikingly absent. We are not having it. And for many years, we had a slow introduction of PPPs within the intergovernmental structure. Could we have a private sector in something which is intergovernmental business?
Right. Interesting points and questions. Firstly, this decoupling of America from China. It's not going to stop now that President Trump lost the election. Let's be clear on this. This is a systemic secular shift. Trump was, if anything, more honest than the rest of the United States authorities in pinpointing what he thinks was the issue. And I think that what Trump said, even though he said it in a way that the rest of the liberal establishment in the United States didn't like it, resonated hugely with the liberal establishment in the United States. And it's this: the great worry that many American policymakers have, and it is a rational worry, is how can they maintain the exorbitant power of the dollar when the American economy falls below 5% of the global economy at some point, which it will. And, Trump had an answer. Trump's answer is we will smash every international multilateralist institution, just smash it. They no longer work for us when we become small relative to the rest of the world. Because however small we are, we're going to be much larger than any other one. So the Trump vision, in my mind, is like that of a bicycle wheel. You have a bicycle wheel and it's got the hub in the middle and it's got the spokes. So Trump envisaged the United States as the hub and every other country as a spoke, China, Europe, and so on, Germany. And he thinks, well, the hub is always more powerful than any of the spokes. You can break one spoke, but the wheel keeps turning. So, for me, the problem with Trump was not that he was incompetent. The problem with Trump was that he was competent. he was actually, he was not very eloquent in the way he spoke. Actually, he couldn't string a few sentences together, but nevertheless, the idea of breaking up multilateralism, setting aside the United Nations, forgetting about the IMF, and having the United States doing transactional business with every other jurisdiction one-on-one, including China. There's going to be a very powerful strand within the Biden administration pushing in that direction, even though they will be making all sorts of nice and polite noises about the importance of, being civilized and so on. So this decoupling of China from the United States has two purposes. One is the one that I just explained. The second one is how to take over a substantial chunk of the Chinese economy, which is refusing to become subservient to Silicon Valley. It really is very simple. There is no European Google. There is no European Facebook. There is no European, Netflix for that matter. There is none of those growth platform mega firms are European. It's American. But the Chinese have created them, at least within China. And, the decoupling is a threat used by the American administration, by the American powers that be, in order to have something to trade with the Chinese, demanding effectively that Facebook is allowed to go and play ball in China, or that they take over the Chinese competitors to the big tech of the United States. Now, the problem with this clash is that the rest of the world is going to suffer. The Chinese working class are going to suffer. The American working class are going to suffer. Europeans are going to suffer. Developing countries will be developing far less. So we face more stagnation, a greater chance of a war, as a result of the inability to have the kind of thinking that FDR had in 1944 when he brought everyone around the table for Bretton Woods. This is my great worry, and the European Union is not doing anything in that regard. I think, they are just not even thinking about it. They're too concerned on how to keep together the business as usual story in Brussels when business cannot be maintained as usual. On the second question regarding PPP.
Just a second. I would refer to excellent lecture of yours given to Cambridge University, if I'm not mistaken, when you explained, and there were many questions related to Trump and also to Bretton Woods, and then practically you said in a nutshell, and I would refer to our viewers today to watch this lecture because it's excellent, and the questions also. So you said practically Trump is not a consequence. He's not creating things. He's just coming on a wave of the things that were happening before. So sure. He's practically. So that was your answer.
Yeah, he's a symptom. He's a symptom of the disease, not the cause of the disease.
He's a consequence of the wrongdoings of the previous administration. That's exactly what you answered. They are
yeah. You have muted yourself. So you need to press the button again. Regarding PPP, look, by that I mean, you're meaning private-public partnership, right? Yeah. It sounds good. I mean, partnership is a good thing. Who would not want to see any partnership, between us, you and me, between the private and the public sector? It sounds fantastic, except that PPP is not a partnership. It sounds as if it is, but it really isn't. Every PPP I have ever come across is an exploitation of the public sector by the private. Because if you look at it, what is it? It's a contract that guarantees the private sector profits, guaranteed profits. So it takes away all the risk from the private sector. I mean, I thought that if free marketeers were always waxing lyrical about the private sector because of its capacity to take on risk. But if you take all the risk away from the private sector, what's the point of having the private sector? And if you put all the risk on the public, it's a complete travesty. So you have the taxpayer paying for all the mistakes of the project, and the private sector is collecting upfront all the benefits. So this is a terrible combination. It's the worst possible combination of the private and the public. If you want to combine the worst of the private and the worst of the public, you end up with a PPP. When it comes to water privatization, building schools, building roads, building hospitals, intergovernmental PPPs and so on, it's a complete catastrophe. It's the relic of a constant encroachment by oligopolistic private interests against the interests both of the public sector and also of small business, of small and medium-sized businesses. So, we should start a campaign against PPPs, both nationally and internationally.
I remember also your take during the DM lectures that you said also the privatization of health sector is the worst possible scenario. But just, to contextualize for the younger generation, since they are representing the major cohort of listeners today. So how they can get into this spinning world that becomes so complicated, so overflooded with different sort of quality information. I mean, the whatever comes to their ears and minds. So there is a deep, let's say, disfranchising feelings among the youth. Firstly, they don't understand the world. They don't feel accepted and welcomed. And for them, it looks like there is no place. There are too many people, too educated. And it's not like, in 80s or 50s that actually people, even with the high schools, were very welcomed by the industry, by the government. So how young people can find their way in everything what you say, how they can follow, how they can put in practice what you are wonderfully telling.
Well, that's the $10 trillion question, isn't it? And I don't have an answer to that. Every young person has an obligation to himself or herself to find that answer. What we oldies can do is remind them of the inscription on top of the Royal Society in London at the behest of Isaac Newton, which says, translated into English, on no one's word. Don't accept anyone's word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Not mine, not the head of the IMFs, not the president of your republic. Question everything, and try to find some kind of manner in which you can compare their claims with the reality that you see. When and ask yourself a very simple question: does the world make sense in the language of those in power? Because if it does, that's fine. I don't think it does. I think that at somewhat close inspection, it just goes to show that those who are in power have a narrative that really is utterly irrational and fails to come up with an explanation of the facts. Now you have, let me give you an example. I mean, Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, made more than 85 billion, around 90 billion, since last February. So that, you know, the world goes pear-shaped, we go into lockdown, the economy collapses, and Jeff Bezos makes close to 90 billion. Now, what is the official narrative? Amazon is a very clever company. They were well situated, right? They were at the right place, at the right time to take advantage of the lockdown and to, you know, become the Red Cross, the private Red Cross, delivering packages, you know, parcels to people's homes, which is true. So they hired more people, you know, they had more revenues, but not 90 billion worth of more revenues. Okay. I mean, the increase in profits was less than $1 billion. How do you go from 1 billion to 90 billion? You know, somebody has to explain that. Right? And this is for one man. I'm not talking about Amazon in total. I'm talking about the one man who owns 11%. How could his wealth go up by 9? So there is no standard textbook economic explanation of it. It's not a reward to his entrepreneurship, to his economizing, to his innovations, right? I mean, he's a very smart man. I don't have a problem that he's rich. He did things that I didn't do, so he is rich and I'm not. Fine, great. But you cannot explain the 90 billion. It's too much money to explain. That money created itself. It was as if he was getting those billions while he was asleep, doing nothing. Somebody was giving that money to him. This money was coming from somewhere. So as young people, ask yourselves, what is a system that channels all this gigantic, gargantuan wealth onto a few people? There is a system here at work. What is that system? It's not a market. It can't be the market. The market can explain 1/100th of it. The rest comes from something else. It's a system of power. Supposedly, you know, Adam Smith's great celebration of the marketplace is that it works well and serves the interests of society when everybody's powerless. When every entrepreneur, the baker, the butcher, and the brewer, to remember the entrepreneurs that Adam Smith mentions in The Wealth of Nations, each one of them is meant to be small, have no capacity to influence the price. Why? Because there's so much competition. If you try to sell your bread a bit more dearly, nobody buys it from you, they go to another baker. So, you know, it's the baker, the brewer, and the butcher who try to improve the quality, to be nice to their customers. Therefore, they are contributing to the moral fabric of their society. And society is better off because none of them are powerful. And here we have a situation where, as we speak, 90%, 90%, I'll say this once more because it's a big number, 90% of all the companies listed in the New York Stock Exchange belong to 3 companies: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. That's not Adam Smith's world. This is a world where you've got feudalism. You've got 3 feudal lords. Okay, now when you start thinking this way, suddenly, hang on a second. Now I can understand why somebody like Jeff Bezos gets 90 billion during a time of severe stress for the world economy. And then you start looking at the way in which those very, very rich and powerful firms and businesses and people and persons, you know, who owns the media that control what you hear? They control the commentary that you read and listen to. Now, why would they want commentary that goes against their interests? They wouldn't. So, you know, that way you can start thinking as an autonomous individual, as a young person who doesn't take anyone for granted.
Very good, thank you. Or gnothi seafton. That could be also a word.
Gnothi seafton.
Yeah. We put actually on our leaflets as a subtitle, gnothi seafton, the old Greek wisdom. Okay, so I think now it's time to open the floor. So guys, please use the opportunity. Come up with a question to our distinguished guest. Don't be shy. Don't take too much time for thinking.
Yeah, just shoot from the hip, as they say.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to
introduction and then put the question, please. I think we have the lady Yes?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Short introduction about your name and then question, please.
Okay, my name is Eva, and I am a student in UMEF University in the first year. It's a pleasure to meet with you now. Thank you. Because the last year in class of economy, I could see of your interview with Mediapart in French. I have questioned politics and economics. You supported Macron during the election. Now you don't say just use the greenwashing and share your some values. It's not. I don't. Okay, it's my question.
So the question is, why did I support Macron?
Yes, why you are supported Macron during the election? And you are satisfied or no?
Well, that's an easy one to answer. Let me also inform you that I supported Macron before the election, and on the Monday, the day after the election, I published a post saying, "Congratulations, Emmanuel. Now we oppose you." Right? Because so the answer to your question is, when a racist stands against somebody who is not a racist, I will always support the non-racist. It really is very simple. Okay? When a misanthrope stands against somebody who is a decent person and I disagree with, I will support the decent person who is, not a clear and present danger to basic human values. And then the next day, I shall be critical of them if they practice austerity and policies that are disenfranchising the majority of the people. I constantly have this dilemma, but I always overcome it in the same way. When Hillary Clinton stole the election, the primary election from Bernie Sanders, my friend, I remember Noam Chomsky and I were having a discussion in New York, and we were both appalled by the way in which the Democratic Party stole the election and effectively shoved Bernie Sanders into the corner, even though we were convinced, Noam and I, that Bernie Sanders would have beaten Trump, unlike Hillary. But we have to make up our minds. What do we tell people?
Because
when it comes to Trump versus Hillary. And Noam and I agreed. We stood on a stage at the New York Public Library, and together we said to the audience, when they asked us, so what do we do in the election? Trump or Clinton? Should we abstain? Should we vote for somebody else? And we said, in swing states, where the vote really counts, hold your nose like that and vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yes,
so
yes.
I think that is a consistent position to take. I mean, I supported Biden now. I really have no sympathy for Biden whatsoever. He's always been on the wrong side of history. He's been sort of in very good terms with racists from the South when he was a younger member of Congress. He resisted Medicare for all. He supported every imperialistic war that the United States ever waged. And yet, when he's running against Trump.
Yes, but me, yes, of course, it's a character of politics, man. But me, I'm French and I live in France. And I say Macron, he's not it's not so populist as that, but you are populist. You understand?
Me? No.
Yeah.
Popular. You mean popular, not populist.
Yeah, there's a difference. I'm a Democrat.
Yes, popular. Yes, you are Democrat.
I despise populism. But let me explain this for you. As your professor said, there is a very big difference between wanting to be popular. We all want to be popular. Who doesn't want to be popular, right? And being populist. Populist for me means the following. You lie to people.
Right.
You tell people what they want to hear.
Yes.
Right? In order to grab their vote. And you do something even worse than that. If they're angry, you stir up their anger and you turn them against other people. like against the blacks, the Jews, the Greeks, the Germans, the Americans, doesn't matter, you know, the gypsies, the other, right? The, you know, gays, lesbians, whatever. You just foment hatred, and you try to use that energy of the hatred in order to make yourself strong. And then you tell them you are going to make them proud again. That's what you do if you're a populist. I live to fight populism. And I will, you know, it's important to be able, as a politician, to tell your people out there difficult truths, inconvenient truths, even if it means that there is a political cost. So today, for instance, here in Greece, as we speak, because I lead a political party here in Greece, we have a defeated people, a humiliated people, a hungry people who are falling prey to nationalism, anti-Turkish nationalism, as we speak here in Greece. Of course, we have a president of Turkey who is also doing the same thing against the Greeks. And, you know, the nationalists always love each other because by turning one people against the other, they benefit. The nationalists, the racists, and the arms dealers benefit from all that, right? But, you know, I go out there, I go on Greek television, and I speak against an anti-Turkish narrative, which comes at a cost. We lose votes from that, but it doesn't matter. We have to do the right thing. So that's what it means not to be a populist.
Okay.
Ioannis, since you mentioned New York lecture, if I'm not mistaken, then you discussed the following. So how much Sanders is the left? Actually, his positions are positions of Eisenhower. I think one of you, either you or Chomsky, were telling that it's not actually any communism. It's the position of the classical right of the 50s, of Eisenhower's positions, practically. That the entire, let's say, political spectrum has tilted to the right.
Well, look, if you think about it, Eisenhower inherited the New Deal from FDR, and he adopted it completely. So it's a bit like a Tory government in England in the 1950s that came after the Attlee Labour government. And even though when they were in opposition, they fought against the National Health Service, Social Security, and so on, the Tories adopted the mantle of the British New Deal, which was the NHS and the social welfare state. And that changed in the mid-1970s when the Republicans adopted monetarism and they adopted neoliberalism. And the same thing happened in the United Kingdom with Thatcher adopting the same mantra of neoliberalism, of breaking the social contract of social democracy. So in a sense, Bernie Sanders, even though in his personal thinking, he's more of a socialist, his proposals, because he's a rational man, he says, okay, I mean, I can't turn America socialist, and I don't want to, because what is of the essence today is to, looking after people. And the way to look after people is to go back to the New Deal, or a modern version of the New Deal, which is also green, a Green New Deal. Yes. So in that sense, it is completely true. Bernie Sanders is portrayed as an extremist, but he's not at all. He is what would have been considered in the 1950s as totally mainstream.
Excuse me?
Yes, please, next question. Yes, gentlemen.
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you.
Your name and the question, please.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Varoufakis. Thank you very much for your speech. I'm Mamadou, General Secretary of the Geneva International Network, a network of professional diplomat, bankers, and scholars. So, Mr. Varoufakis, nowadays, we can observe that there is a kind of terrible marriage between capitalism and technology. And this union is really impacting the liveness for our democracies and also badly impacting our planet. Thinkers like Mr. Harari in his book Homo Deus describe that phenomenon very well, for example. So how could we get our leaders to understand that the deregulation of capitalism and technological boom aren't necessarily what we could call progress? People were thinking, okay, this pandemic is going to change the path of the world and we are going to see big reforms happening. But what do you think? regarding also to the election of Mr. Biden, do you think that we are going to have a much more effective multilateralism on crucial issues of our centuries? Thank you.
I shall answer the second question first. No, I don't, especially when I see that even before the election, the neocons moved into his camp. So the very same people who actually broke down multilateralism, broke down the United Nations Charter by invading Iraq, the very same people are now part of his foreign policy team. So I'm not very optimistic, I have to tell you. I hope I'm wrong. You know, I live for the moment Joe Biden proves that I'm wrong. But when it comes to the first question, what can we do to persuade our politicians to rethink deregulation and to think of the importance of new institutions that put the financial genie into the bottle, that control and constrain the exorbitant power of Amazon, of Facebook, and so on. You know what the answer to that is? Overthrow them. You cannot convince them. Because you know what? They don't need convincing. I spent a very short period of time in government, very short, 6 months. That's how long the system took before they ejected me. But it was long enough to see the eye-glaring reality. Behind closed doors, I would speak to these people. These people, you know, they're not bad people. They're not good people. They're just rather banal people. You know, neither wonderful nor horrible. They're just run-of-the-mill, you know, people. And behind closed doors, you know, if you reach that level of being inside the closed doors with you and you told them what you just said to me, they would say, yeah, I agree with you. And would probably agree with you. And if you had a discussion about Amazon, a discussion about the importance of regulating the financial sector and so on, you know, I had the ridiculous and fascinating experience of being in the room with the most powerful of people at the time, like, you know, Christine Lagarde, Barack Obama, Mario Draghi, you know, Wolfgang Schäuble, you know, Emmanuel Macron. And sometimes, you know, members of the press ask me, how can you be so arrogant, Mr. Varoufakis? I mean, all these smart people can be wrong and you're right. And what I say to them is that, look, if they insisted on the things that they say in public, if they insisted on saying the same things to me in my face, at some point, because they are smart people, not very smart, but they're smart, I would start feeling insecure about my views. But I can assure you that behind closed doors, they all said to me that I was right. So, you know, my answer to the journalist is, they told me I was right. That's why I feel that, you know what, maybe I am right. When your opponent tells you you're right, then that reduces the existentialist angst that you have that you're wrong. But of course, then when the camera was switched on, when we were outside the closed doors, all right, of the room in which candor was free-flowing, you know, in front of the cameras, they would repeat the same mantra. And then there were moments when after the press conference, you know, I remember with the finance minister of France at the time, I was flabbergasted. It was only my first week in the ministry. We had a beautiful exchange with the French Minister of Finance, Mr. Michel Sapin. And he sounded like my cheerleader behind closed doors. Like, you know, everything I said was fantastic. Then we go out in front of the microphones and the cameras, and he speaks as if he's the German finance minister, you know, doing this at me. And I think, I can't be experiencing this. This is ridiculous. Yeah. So as we were walking away, you know, I decided to be funny. Either I would be nasty or funny or ironic. So I was ironic. I said to him, who are you and what have you done to the Michel Sapin that I met in there? And you know what he did? He turned around and he said to me, Ioannis, you've got to realize France is not what it used to be. I don't have, and what he meant, he didn't say that in so many words, but he meant, I don't have the power to say that which I believe in. So the answer to your question is, we need to replace them with people who don't give a damn about being on the right side of power and just, doing that which is right. But that is a political revolution we're talking about. So yes, you as youngsters have a huge amount of work to do. We, the older generation, we have failed. There is no doubt about that.
Thanks for answer.
Very good. So the next question, please.
I have a question.
Yes,
Jana.
yes. Your name and your question. Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So Mr. Varoufakis, first of all, thank you for being among us. It's a true honor to have you today. So thank you for that. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Fiona Comlan. And you just met my coworker Mamadou, great coworker, by the way. And I'm president of the Geneva International Network. And my question is, so I wanted to know, do you think that the European Union is too liberal? And that liberalism that maybe could cause the kind of implosion, and especially due to the lack of inclusion of southern countries.
The lack of inclusion of southern countries, like what? Like Greece, you mean?
Exactly.
Look, the problem with the EU is that it's not a real union. It started off as a cartel. There's a difference between a union and a cartel, You remember OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries? That's the model. That's the model. What's OPEC? It's a get-together of sellers of oil with one intention, to maximize their profits, their economic rents, to be precise, to make sure that the price stays up during periods of slump. That's what OPEC does, right? That's what the European Union was meant to do. You remember the first name of the European Union? The European Communities of Coal and Steel. Like, it could have been of oil, but they didn't have any oil. So it was of oil, of coal and steel. So the whole idea was how to prevent competition between coal and steel producers in Germany, in Belgium, in Holland, in France, and Northern Italy. That's it. Yeah, that was the European Union. That's how it began. And then this cartel broadened. They introduced the electrical goods producers. They introduced the car makers. They introduced the large-scale farmers of France, who were also cut into the deal. The deal was, you will allow for free trade, completely free trade between all those countries, including agricultural goods. We will give you a large chunk of the profits of the cartel. This is also called the common agricultural policy. Take a chunk of our profits and shut up to the French farmers, right? That's a cartel. And then they needed political legitimacy. So they created the treaties with all the great rhetoric about democracy. But democracy is not allowed in Brussels. Brussels is a democracy-free zone. It's the hierarchy of a cartel. And every position is appointed. None of them are elected. And then at some point, to have more legitimacy, they created the parliament, which is the only parliament in the history of the world that cannot initiate legislation, right? So it's a rubber stamp. They've been giving more powers to the parliament, but those powers are of a nuclear button type. So the parliament, for instance, has the right to dismiss the whole of the commission, or to dismiss the whole of the budget, or nothing at all. So it's like me giving you, you're walking on the streets and you're worried about your life because there are some lowlifes around, and I give you a nuclear weapon. It's useless. What are you going to do? Destroy the world if somebody attacks you? This is the European Parliament for you, right? It's got a nuclear button, which is useless. Because, anyway, you understand what I'm saying. So this is the way it has been. And our movement, Democracy in Europe movement, DM25, that's why we have the letter D there, democracy, because this is the one thing that we're missing in the European Union. They hear the word democracy in Brussels and they freak out. I remember when it was a remarkable meeting of finance ministers when I announced that we were going, they were pushing an ultimatum down my throat, sign here on the dotted line. And that committed generations of Greeks to austerity, to privatization, and so on. I said, okay, fine. Look, I don't want to have a fight with the European Union, but at the same time, I am not authorized by the people of Greece to sign on the dotted line. They didn't elect me for that. So I'm going to ask the Greek people in a referendum to decide what they do. And when I told them, all hell broke loose in the European Union meeting. I was accused of being irresponsible for giving the people of Greece the right to choose. I said, hang on a second, we're supposed to be a union of democracies. And the only thing they didn't tell me was, but that's what they implied was, and you took this seriously? This is the propaganda. We don't give the people the right to choose, for God's sakes. Do you the Italian foreign finance minister, very nice man, said to me, but Ioannis, the people cannot make complicated decisions for their own, for themselves. I said, really? I thought that's why we're Democrats, that people can make decisions. So there you are.
Thank you.
I still have a question.
Go for it.
Yes.
You think the New Deal could bring a new relationship of trust with Europe, of contrary or gel?
You mean the cross-generational contract? Or the pan-European? Or both?
Absolutely, Eva, absolutely. Because you see, the problem is this. If Europe was poor, if we were all dirt poor as a continent, okay, what can you expect of poor people? But, if you, as a youngster, as a young person, you look at Europe, which is floating in wealth. This is a wealthy continent. It is a ridiculously wealthy continent full of poor people, but it's a wealthy continent. Never before in the history of Europe have we had so much wealth. We've never had so much money. The problem we have is too much money, which is never invested in the things that we need. Okay, so your generation is now effectively condemned to precarious jobs forever and to climate change, because the money that is there is not being invested in good quality green jobs. So the whole point about the Green New Deal is to take money which is there and to invest it in good quality jobs in the green transition. That is what the old generation owes to the young generation. Okay? And this is why it is very heartening for me and hope-inspiring to see, Fridays for Future, to see the youngsters striking for climate and so on. But what you need, what those youngsters need, it's not enough to protest and to demonstrate. You need a blueprint. You need a program. So what we all this must do is, because we have, experience with these programs, we remember what the New Deal was. We have an idea of how the New Deal can become from brown that used to be green. Effectively, to hand over to you some tools, some ideas of how you can take this excess liquidity, excess cash, and put it to good use. But you will have to do it. And you will not do it by convincing old men and women in power that it is the right thing to do. They don't care. They're in the pockets of those who are destroying the planet and destroying your lives. You've got to overthrow them and to replace them. You've got to take decision-making in your own hands. But for that, you need a program. And that requires study. So you need activism and knowledge. Doing and learning.
Very good. So it comes to your argument. Maybe you can just shortly, let's say, repeat that actually, I think you put it vividly, so that politics, that the politicians look, let's say, less and less bright or intelligent, and that's because actually the real economic policy sphere is outside of the democratic process. So democratic process becomes the ritual walk every 3-4 years to the polling stations to vote for more and more jovial or Lady Gaga-like type of the candidates.
Yes, I want
if you can tell them a few words on that very good argument that you usually state.
You see, I mean, I've been baffled, like many people have been, by the decline in the quality of politicians over the last 30, 40 years. You know, there used to be some very smart people in politics. I remember listening to parliaments. I have this habit of, I like to listen into parliaments, whether it's the British Parliament or the Congress or the French National Assembly or the Greek Parliament. And there were some wonderful speeches, excellent positions. Now the quality, you know, for 40 years has been dropping like you know, a lead balloon. And I was always worried. I mean, what is it? Is it our DNA that it is deteriorating? No, because when you talk to young people, you see that there is an improvement in the quality of thinking, not a decline. So, but why is it that politics is going that way? And the theory that I developed, and thank you for mentioning it, is that, look, if you think about the transition from feudalism to capitalism, when we had feudalism, all power was vested in one sphere. Politics and economics was one thing. So if you were the Lord, you were rich. And to be rich, you had to be the Lord. You could not be rich if you were not the Lord. So political power, right, which was inherited usually, or won by conquest, and economic power were one thing. If you had political power, you had economic power, and vice versa. With capitalism, you have the separation of the political from the economic sphere. So the merchants and the first industrialists and entrepreneurs who were low-class people, they were not members of the gentry. They were not lords, barons, whatever. They acquired more and more economic power with the decoupling of markets from the feudal milieu. And you had lords who were not that rich, actually lords that became increasingly impoverished, and rich merchants, bankers and so on, that became very, very powerful economically. So you had this decoupling. Then after the end of Bretton Woods in the 1970s, you had a second decoupling. So political and economic spheres were decoupled already. Democracy stayed in the political sphere, which was not powerful anymore. The economic sphere was not democratic. But then the economic sphere started separating in two: industry and finance. And power started shifting towards finance, away from industry. So once upon a time, if you were industrialist making steel, you were the king, right? You were the power, Krupp in Germany. But after that, you know, you have Goldman Sachs, which is 1 million times more powerful. They don't make anything. They just create, you know, different varieties of debt and, you know, derivatives based on derivatives on debt. So they just do produce nothing of value, of real value, but has huge price. So Goldman Sachs. And so with this transfer of power from the economic sphere to the financial sphere, even further away from the political sphere, suddenly suddenly those who were in government had zero power, next to zero power. So compare and contrast, you know, Biden with Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. And Lyndon Johnson was with Eisenhower, whom you mentioned before. You know, every president has less power than the previous presidents. But every president of Goldman Sachs had more power than the previous president of, you know, CEO of Goldman Sachs. So society is effectively sending signals to people, to young people. If you really want power, don't go into politics, go into finance. So we've had this exodus of talent from politics, from manufacturing, from academia, from journalism into finance. Even the best physicists, you know, getting a first-class degree from Stanford University in theoretical physics, they ended up working in Wall Street. They didn't end up working in physics. And I think that explains the constant diminution in the talent that we see in government and in parliament. So you need to get in there.
Since you've been sitting with the finance minister, so is there the deficit of empathy? I mean, just a very personal question in a way.
No, there is, you know what, there is fear.
Because, I mean, if you don't work for society, so it must be a lack of empathy or ignorance.
You know what I saw? I mean, there was lack of empathy. Of course, there was lack of empathy amongst the finance ministers. But you know what? I think that to understand it, I try to be very humanistic in the way I understood my opponents in the group of ministers. What I saw was not so much bad people who were not empathetic. I saw scared people. And what were they scared of? Well, firstly, the people who put them there. Because, you know, all those people, all those finance ministers ran political campaigns. Most of those campaigns were financed by bankers. So, you know, you don't bite the hand that feeds you easily. I mean, you need to have substance before you do that. But more than that, I'll give you an example. I had the Spanish finance minister next to me, right? Sitting next to me. His name was Luis. I actually liked him and we got on very well, you know. I didn't feel lack of empathy from him on a person-to-person basis. What I felt was he was terrorized. By what? He had spent years implementing harsh austerity upon the Spanish people on behalf of bankers, right? And when he was listening to me fight on behalf of the Greek people to stop that from happening in Greece, or to stop it from happening again to Greece, you know what his fear was? He was thinking to himself, if this bastard Ioannis succeeds, then my voters will say, why didn't you fight for us? And then you wouldn't be able to walk on the streets of Madrid. So he had to crush me. Because otherwise, you know, he was fearful of that he would not be able to stand his ground, even within his own community in Spain.
Amazing. Okay, so maybe 1-2 questions more before we close for today. Please use the opportunity. I understand we have also guests from Brazil, from Central Asia. Yes, please. Yes.
Who, me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Christian, and I do have a question. First of all, like, it was about a post that you posted on The Guardian, and it was about capitalism. And like, my question is, well, you say like there's like on that post, if I remember, that was on September 4th, and you said like there's like an alternative to capitalism. But do you really, I mean, I guess you believe that because you said that, but like, is it really possible? Because like, excuse my French, but like, for example, if we take, for example, like communism back in the days, on paper, it looked well, right? But like to apply them into society was not really possible. And in these days today that we're living in right now, like, I don't feel like there is really an alternative about capitalism. I don't know, like, what do you think about that?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me say that communism ended up a tragedy. There's no doubt about that. And if I had been born and raised in communism, I would be in the Gulag. Even though I'm a leftist. But don't forget that the Gulag was created for leftists. It was not created for rightists. Don't forget that.
Right, that's true. That's true.
Communism failed and became a tragedy. But let me remind you that the French Revolution failed. You know, this wonderful rebellion against the royal regime, which was animated by the notions of liberty, equality, fraternity, the notions of democracy, the creation of a national assembly, right? Ended up in a bloodbath, a complete bloodbath. And then you had the debacle of Napoleon II, Napoleon III, Napoleon VIII, So you could, if this was, if we were in the 1860s today, imagine this is the 1860s, and you turn around and you said, look, this democracy thing is ridiculous. It would never work. Because it didn't work. Look at what happened in the French Revolution. It would be similar to what you're saying to me now. Humanity tries to liberate itself from shackles and often creates worse shackles in the process. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. I mean, think of Haiti. Haiti was the first republic set up by freed slaves after a rebellion. It didn't end well. That doesn't mean that slaves should not rebel and that slavery is the natural state of being. So we need constantly to try to reimagine. By the way, capitalism is going to die anyway. I keep being asked, who is the worst enemy of capitalism? And it's not the left, it's capitalism. Capitalism is the worst enemy of capitalism. Today, I think that especially now with COVID-19, we've already shifted to a kind of post-capitalism. We don't have capitalism now. I referred to this before when saying that, Jeff Bezos made almost $90 billion. This is not capitalism. This is a kind of feudalism. I call it techno-feudalism. You've got 3 companies owning bloody everything, right? That's not capitalism. That's a kind of feudal order with artificial intelligence, with Facebook, with algorithms, with surveillance. Soon, we don't even control what we like. There's not, the liberal individual has died. Most of the time, if you think about it, what are these big tech companies doing? They are a mind manipulation machine. They tell us what to listen to, what to watch, what to think, and we don't even know that. So we are already in a post-capitalist world. So since we are already moving in a direction of post-capitalism, I think that the choice is not whether we stick to capitalism or go for something beyond capitalism. The question is, what post-capitalism are we going to allow to occur? Is it going to be a dystopian one, or is it going to be a more utopic one? So since you've given me this opening, I have to, I wasn't going to do this, but here it is. This is my latest book. Sorry about this, but it has to happen. It's called Another Now.
Yeah, I know this one. I saw it. Yeah.
And in this, I try to answer the question: how could life be organized in a non-capitalist way, which is liberal, which escapes the authoritarianism and tyranny of the Soviet Union, in which people are actually free to choose their partners and free of fear of hunger, of precarity, of ill health, utilizing the technologies that we have, not some Star Trek kind of technology that we don't have. So I think we should all try to answer this question for ourselves.
So since you showed the book, so do we still write books to people or to the Amazon algorithm? Who we are writing?
Yeah, well, I just heard only this morning that Amazon is now withholding from publishers information on book sales through Amazon. Get it? They are now going completely ballistic, all out, to keep all the information to themselves and to sell every smidgen of information, even to people who actually make Amazon what it is. So, this book, when it sells, my publisher will not know the figures or have the analytics. We'll have to pay for them. So in the end, they're not just monopolists. They own the marketplace. It's like the equivalent of owning the streets, the lampposts, the tarmac, the benches where people sit to rest between shops.
We are already over the time, but if you stay with us for a few more minutes, maybe one or two questions for the audience.
Let's have both of them taken, and then I'll answer.
Okay.
Yes, I have a question, please.
Okay. So one or two questions, please.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yes,
your name is?
My name is Ob. I'm studying. I'm studying relation diplomacy in Swiss UMEF. My question is like, since the bankruptcy declaration, please. Sorry, I repeat, since the declaration of bankruptcy, what strategy Greece has put in place to recover or revive its economy? And in your opinion, what the elements or the elements that lead Greece to declaring?
Thank you. Let's have another one, and I shall answer both.
Okay.
Jeff has his hand up, but he's muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes, please.
I have 10,000 questions for you, my friend, but I was going to ask you, seeing as you have Banksy book on your shelf, what was the best book on your shelf? You now have told me what the best book on your shelf is. Can you tell me the second best book on your shelves that you would recommend to our students?
Well, this is not my proper bookshelf. This is just in the bedroom.
That's okay.
Okay. Oh, my goodness, you know, it's like being asked what's your favorite piece of music or film.
Yes, I know, I understand.
Crippling. This is crippling.
Should be Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger.
Okay. So let me start with Ob's question. Okay, look, the policy, the proposals I went to Brussels and Washington with regarding the Greek debt, the Greek bankruptcy, were as mild as I could make them, while at the same time keeping them therapeutic. So trying to be realistic and pragmatic, I wanted to come up with a proposal that Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, could present to her parliament as her own idea. Because this is the only way, you need to help your opponents swallow what you are giving them, right? Being diplomatic, since you're a student of diplomacy, right? It didn't work in the end because they just wanted to crush us, and they crushed us. But the idea was, look, we need to have a haircut. We needed to, we had more than 300 billion euros, $380 billion debt for a tiny country. It just cannot be paid. So, I mean, the simple way of doing it was to cut 100 billion of it, at least, in order to be able to repay the rest. But that was politically unpalatable. And so I proposed something else. I proposed that the rate of repayment is connected to the rate of growth. So in other words, I told our creditors, become partners in our growth. The more we grow, the more money you get, so as to create incentive compatibility, right? So that you have an incentive for us to grow, and the more we grow, the more you get. So that was the essence of it. And behind closed doors, everybody thought it was a splendid idea. But of course, they were saying to me, we can't say this in public because, we've already committed to not doing it. What is the strategy now for Greece? Look, now we have a new right-wing government, which is predatory, totally predatory. So they have a social circle of people around them. They are all invested in vulture funds that are registered in Delaware, in New Jersey, in Luxembourg. And now what they're doing is they are playing along with the Troika. And what they are getting, and their social circle is getting, is the right and the opportunity to effectively grab private wealth, private assets. People having non-performing loans. You have a house, you have a loan for 100,000 euros, you can't repay it, you can't meet the repayments every month because of the crisis. They buy the loan for 5% of its value. Okay, they get your house, they sell it, fire sale, they've paid only 5% of it. So whatever they make is a huge profit rate for them. And they share it amongst themselves and the Troika people and so on. It's just awful. It's just, predatory behavior. That's the answer to your question. Now, you want me to come up with a book? I don't know what books I have here. Does it have to be from this shelf? Okay.
No, you could be anyone from your life.
Oh, well, look, since you have, I'm not prepared.
Or maybe to contextualize, Ioannis, maybe
well,
to
look,
contextualize
I'm
for the students also.
I'm going to tell you what showed me through. What helped me when I went to England in 1978 as a first-year student of mathematics at the time. What was it that kept me alive and allowed me to connect with a very difficult society, the society of Britain, of England to be precise? I bought the cheapest collected works of William Shakespeare I could find, just because they were expensive. And for 3 years I was reading Shakespeare when I wasn't reading mathematics and economics. So the collected works of Shakespeare is one book. And the second book, if I may, the collected plays of Sophocles, with Antigone being the number one.
Oh,
there.
nice.
You asked me, I told you.
No, nice. No, thank you very much for that. I said I have 1,000 questions, but they are beautiful answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. So Ioannis, we don't have more time, so you have to go now.
Yeah, I've got to go.
Okay. It was our great pleasure. Thank you so much for staying also a little bit longer with us. On behalf of our rector of UMEF University and on behalf of all of us, we enjoyed, and thank you so much for coming with us today. We hope that before too long, we will be hosting you also physically in Geneva.
That would be nice.
UMEF University has moved from the center to a beautiful chateau. And it's also a place to socialize because we have to compensate also on socializing. And it's a brilliant setting. And I'm sure that you would enjoy this. This is another Geneva, or more like a Provence of France. It really has a flair and good wines, not as good as in Greece, but definitely a nice wines, a nice hospitable atmosphere. And we are welcoming you to come before too long for the lecture, also for the socializing. We wish you all of the luck, and also with the book and also with the political engagement. And thank you so much. We will stay definitely in touch with you. And thanks to all audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the flesh, as they say.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is then the end. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Excellent questions. Very good.
We think differently.